Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Jessica Farmer from Farmer Loves Phonics. Jessica is a mom of two and former classroom teacher who is now a professional development trainer and literacy advocate. She's a facilitator for LETRS Early Childhood, as well as the lead professional development trainer for Rainbow Phonics. Back when the pandemic started in 2020, Jessica dove deep into learning all about the science of reading and how kids actually learn to read based on science. She started sharing her tips online on TikTok and Instagram at Farmer Loves Phonics, and she has been able to support so many parents and teachers on this journey of learning how we teach kids to read. In this episode, Jessica and I specifically talk about teaching the alphabet, and she gives us exactly what we need to do to teach the alphabet to little ones so that it will stick and they will remember the letters and sounds, and then they will be able to become strong readers. If you have any questions about this episode, you can reach out to me. I'm on Instagram at Little Love Learning Blog. You can also reach out to Jessica. Like I mentioned, she's on Instagram at Farmer Loves Phonics. Hey, Jessica, welcome to the Little Love Learning Podcast.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
Well, this is a little bit of a fangirl moment because I've been following you on social media forever, and I love everything that you share and how supportive you are of teachers and parents in this literacy world. And so I wanted you to come on because I was telling you before we started recording, I think you explain things so well and so clearly. And so for my listeners, that's going to be really helpful as we're talking about some more complex literacy topics. You can just help them understand it more clearly.
Oh, thank you so much. I really aim to make information manageable and meaningful and something that you can apply right away, because I think that's really important.
Yes, application is key. Well, let's
Mhm.
jump back before we get into all of that because I would love to know how you even became a teacher in the first place, kind of what inspired this journey in education, how it all started.
So education truly runs in my family. I think that happens for a lot of teachers, but it feels like I was born to be an educator. My mom was a choir teacher. She was actually my middle school choir teacher.
Oh
So I
my
had
gosh.
mom as a teacher. And my dad taught physical education, and he's always been coaching various sports. He was the athletic director at the middle school I went to as well. So both my parents worked at the school. And beyond my parents, I have aunts and cousins that are in education. So it's basically in my blood to be a passionate educator. It just was the natural path that I followed. And also, I met my husband in college, and we both went through the College of Education together.
Oh my
And
gosh.
we have both taught at the elementary level. So it's just like all around a part of my family.
That is so neat. So many educators in your family. And how did you feel with your parents being at your middle school? Before we hit record, we were talking about we both have middle schoolers and they
Yes.
don't always want their parents around.
Yeah. Yeah, that was fitting, wasn't it? It was interesting. I really loved having my mom as a teacher, but sometimes friends would say, "Oh, you got an A because that's your mom," and all of that. So I was always like, "No,
Oh
my
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 goodness.
mom grades me fairly. I promise she grades me fairly." And I was never embarrassed of my parents that much, although my mom, of course, being a choir teacher, is singing all the time. And I do remember her sometimes singing in the grocery store, and that would really embarrass me in middle school. And now I realize I do that with my kids. So I think it's just something we parents do, is just embarrass our children. It's a rite of passage.
That's right. A full circle moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you in your education journey have really focused on literacy. I know you
Mhm.
came from a balanced literacy background and then you dove headfirst into the science of reading. So I would
Yeah.
love to hear about your journey in the science of reading.
Yeah, so my journey into the science of reading actually started in 2019. I read an article by Emily Hanford called At a Loss for Words. If you haven't read it, please Google for it and read all of her articles because they're excellent. But that article really resonated deeply with me. And so in 2020, before the pandemic, I took a deep dive into the science of reading, and I really spent that year immersing myself in everything that I could read, research, articles, books. And when schools did shut down in 2020, I just started sharing everything that I was learning on TikTok because I wanted to help parents bridge that gap, because there was a literacy crisis happening that was becoming aware at that time. And then in 2021 and 2022, I completed Letters for Early Childhood. I went through Orton Gillingham training through IMSE. And so that really just kind of solidified all of the information that I was putting together for myself as I was researching on my own. And as a former balanced literacy teacher, I was trained in guided reading. I was doing the running records. I was teaching the guessing strategies. And so finally having this training that was backed by evidence and research was something that I really needed. And so many people describe letters as like the how or the why, and then they explain Orton Gillingham as the how you apply that. And so that blend of knowledge just changed everything for me, and it really gave me the background knowledge that I needed to implement the best strategies possible for my students. And so I always tell anyone who asks me, what do I need to do to learn about the science of reading? If you can get high quality training, there's so many opportunities out there. Really, I encourage you to invest in it because it's worth it. You can do a lot of the research on your own, but just having that high quality training really helps give you the reasoning behind those practices, and then you're able to apply it, which truly makes all the difference for our young students.
Absolutely. We have such a similar timeline. It was around the exact same time I heard of Emily
Yeah.
Hanford. I listened to her audio reports. It was at a loss for words, but it was the
Okay.
audio version.
Okay.
Just phenomenal. Opened my eyes. And I had already been staying home. So I needed hours to renew my teacher certificate. So I had to go and find the hours myself, pay for them myself. So I was looking for trainings. And that's really when I was able to do my deep dive. I also did Letters Early Childhood. I also did Orton Gillingham. Like you said, the blend of the two of them really changed everything for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can't believe it. Our paths are
So
so
funny.
similar.
Now, what do you see? Okay, so 2020, we had the pandemic, and
Yeah.
now we see those kindergartners are fourth graders, and a
Yeah.
lot of those kids who had the problem with teaching reading with masks and virtually, and just the struggle that we had back then. What are we seeing with those kids now? Are we seeing any lasting struggles? Are we seeing anything that we can go back and fix now? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think the pandemic was this major turning point in early literacy because it gave a lot of parents a direct view into what was happening with that online instruction. And I don't know if you saw a viral video on YouTube called the Purple Challenge.
Yes, I
If
did.
you haven't watched it, it's a two-part series, but the parent basically shares how her child is being taught to guess and look at the picture instead of decoding words. And so that video was huge. It was all over the place, and it kind of brought significant attention to what the issues were with balanced literacy and what those children in kindergarten, in first grade, were learning at that time. And it started sparking big conversations about the science of reading. And so I noticed this in a lot of states, they were beginning to pass some legislation about the science of reading, and also questioning those big box curriculum that were failing a lot of our children. And so even though a lot of things were not going very well during the pandemic in terms of teaching, I think we had a big shift towards best practices and starting to get teachers trained. Now, the trickle down takes time to get everyone trained, to get the right programs in place, and to start teaching. And so I know that the teachers that are working with fourth graders right now see a struggle in those students because they were just going through school as those shifts were being made. But I am hopeful that we are on our way to making improvements. And so the children that are starting kindergarten now, I'm so hopeful that because phonemic awareness and phonics are being a big push and drive in the primary grades, and even though reading encompasses way more than phonics, we know that I think we're moving in a positive direction. And so teachers and parents and policymakers, they're asking the questions that need to be asked right now. We are looking for solutions based in research. And so I think that shift alone is a huge step forward. And I know it might take a few years for us to see it, but I do think like we're getting there. We're getting somewhere.
It's such a positive outlook on the situation. And I love that. You're very hopeful. There's so many changes that are happening. So when my daughter, who's now in sixth grade, when she was in first grade, it was very much balanced literacy, very much memorizing sight words. And now my son is in first grade. And it's so cool. I was just subbing in his classroom yesterday. It's amazing to hear what these kids know about phonics. They can tell
Yes,
you why they're using CK. They can
yes.
tell you, we were just talking about a suffix S. It's going to be representing the sound after an unvoiced sound, and it's going to be representing the Z sound after a voiced sound. They can actually articulate that, and they're 6 years old. It's phenomenal to see the shift. So I agree with you. I'm so hopeful that this is going to be happening in more and more schools.
Absolutely. And I see the same in my two children because my youngest, again, our children are around the same age with around the same age gap. My oldest basically learned to read pretty naturally. It came easy for him. I did do phonics with him at home, but it came easy for him. And but I do notice a gap in his spelling.
Mhm.
Sometimes I will check his writing now and be like, oh my goodness, you don't know how to spell that. And I think it's because you weren't taught the same way as my youngest was. And just like you said, my youngest is now saying, oh, mommy, that word ends in a U, but I thought English words don't end in a U. And I was like, wow. Oh, he was talking about Gru um, in the Minions movies. And I'm like, well, names usually don't follow the rules. And depending on the language where the name is coming from, it's going to be spelled differently. And just those little things he picks up on, like, wow, I didn't realize that that was spelled that way. And comparing two words that sound the same, today he was talking to me about sense and sense, and he's like, they sound the same but they mean different things, and we wrote them down and looked at them, and so it's just amazing that they can dig into the words and really think about the meaning. So I definitely see those positives happening in my son as well.
That is so cool.
Yes.
Yes, so many of these tips that I have learned about phonics. Of course, I learned in my letters training and in Orton Gillingham, but the way people share on Instagram and on TikTok nowadays is
Yeah.
so helpful. That's ridiculously helpful for parents and for teachers. So I would love to hear about your journey on social media. You have an amazing following and you share such good tips. So how did that all get started?
Yeah. So, like I said before, during the pandemic, I started sharing on TikTok because it just didn't seem like that information was out there yet. And I then came across Drop in Knowledge with Heidi, and she and
Yes.
I were on TikTok, and we were like some of the first few accounts on TikTok. But I know Instagram had a lot of people sharing about phonics and Orton Gillingham, and so I started my Instagram account after maybe it was a year after I'd been on TikTok, and just started sharing everything. And then Facebook and then YouTube and all these places just to make sure all my bases were covered. And I think social media is just such an incredible tool for spreading awareness about any topic and knowledge, but especially about the science of reading, because I think teachers are just hungry for information. And it's great because you can share bite sized digestible pieces of information and you can share it wide. Where else can you reach a million people with a push of a button? That doesn't happen very many places. So TikTok and Instagram have really opened up opportunities to educate not only teachers, but tutors and parents and caregivers, and just to help bridge that gap between research and practice. And that doesn't mean there aren't challenges with it. We know that misinformation spreads just as fast as facts do. So I just always like to say, be cautious with who you follow. Make sure that you are checking into their credentials, making sure they're a reliable person that's giving you the real information. I draw from 13 years of classroom experience and 3 years in professional development. I am always transparent about the training that I have. And I also make sure that I tell anyone who follows me, I don't have all the answers. No one does. So make sure you are learning from multiple sources of people and books and research and trainings. But I truly love teaching on social media because I have been able to connect with people from around the world. I mean, connecting with people from all these different countries and learning information about literacy across the globe. That is what is truly special. It's a place for collaboration, for learning, for sharing resources. And we're all doing it to improve outcomes for the kids everywhere. So that's why I love what I do.
Well, thank you for adding that in there, that social media is so helpful. And yet, you need to be careful of who you follow. I love that you mentioned that because I do see accounts that are still sharing old and outdated information, or we see a lot of YouTube videos with the alphabet, with a lot of the pronunciation of the sounds is incorrect, and it's just going to cause a struggle later on. And so, just finding accounts that you follow, that you jive with, you like their vibe, checking in their credentials, and then they're probably going to be sharing the same thing. So if you're seeing the same things on Jessica's account that you're seeing on, you mentioned Heidi, Drop in Knowledge with
Yeah.
Heidi, who's phenomenal, then you're knowing, okay, I'm seeing this multiple places. If you're seeing one account saying, I know it all, I know everything, and it's not going with what you're seeing from other places, just be cautious because
Right.
you can reach a lot of people with social media and you have to be very careful of what you're sharing and who you're following.
Absolutely.
Now, let's transition a little bit because a lot of my listeners are preschool and kindergarten parents and teachers. And we want to start very, very basic with the alphabet.
Okay.
You have been doing professional development, you said, for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And so you are a pro at teaching parents and teachers what they need to know when it comes to something as basic as the alphabet. So I would just love some tips, maybe common mistakes you see parents make, what they could avoid, maybe some myths people have about the alphabet, anything you want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the most common mistakes that I see when teaching the alphabet is introducing a letter one time and expecting the child to remember it. Learning the alphabet, just like any new skill, takes time, takes practice, takes repetition. And so, research tells us that it can take anywhere from 4 to 200 exposures for a child to master a new concept, depending on the individual learner. So repetition and multiple exposures are necessary. So avoid that mistake. Don't think it's a one and done because it's definitely not. In order to learn how to read, the brain is building pathways. Literally, your child's brain is rewiring itself. So, really give them a lot of opportunities and exposure to any new skill that you are teaching them. And another frequent mistake that I see is focusing only on one aspect of a letter at a time, such as just teaching the name or just teaching the sound. You want to teach the name, the sound, a keyword, the letter formation of the uppercase and lowercase, and even the articulation all at once. And that is much more effective. And this is based on research. I'm not just making it up. So I've got to cite my sources by Piasta and Wagner in 2009. They had done a meta analysis that teaching multiple components of the alphabet simultaneously, such as combining the name, the sound, how to write it, leads to better literacy outcomes for our young learners. We have to provide that direct, explicit instruction with consistent review and cycling through the alphabet multiple times. So it's helpful to make that playful and engaging with hands-on activities and games, but we've got to provide that direct instruction for our students. And I do want to mention that Rainbow Phonics, which is the program that I'm lead trainer for, has developed free alphabet slideshows that right now anyone can use to introduce the alphabet. And the structure of the lessons align with the research I just shared. I helped to develop these lessons, and I wanted to be sure that the slides included all of those essential components. So definitely check those out. And if you can't find them, just let me know, message me, and I'll find them for you.
Well, we'll definitely put the link below. That is amazing.
Yay. Yeah.
That's so important because one of the things we can see on social media is people sharing, just teach the letter sound. You don't need the name to read. Don't worry about teaching the name. Just teach your child the letter sound. And I do think that that's misguided. Like you said, research is showing when they have more information that they can anchor on to that letter, they're going to
Right.
be able to remember it so much better than if you
Absolutely.
just are telling them that sound. Not to mention when they're spelling, we know that when they're spelling, they're going to need to understand that a sound is spelled with a letter. The
Right.
letter is not the sound, they're different. And so it's important to know those letter names also.
Yeah. I always link it to think when you were teaching your toddler different animals and you were teaching them the sounds the animals make. You would teach them this is a cow and the cow says moo. We wouldn't just look at it and just say moo,
Yes.
moo, moo, and then they start calling the cow a moo. So that's what I like to relate it to. If your toddler can learn that this is a cow and the cow says moo, they can learn this is A and A spells a. So I always try to take it back to that because when we're teaching them names of objects and the things that those objects do, they can learn that simultaneously.
Absolutely. And the uppercase and lowercase. I love that you brought that up too. I know that I see people say they're just going to need lowercase because that's what they're going to see in most books, but it's super important that they understand the uppercase and lowercase are both the letter of that name, the name of the letter, and that they're representing that sound that we're teaching them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, do you have any fun games or activities, just maybe one or two that you want to share with the listeners for practicing the alphabet?
Yeah, well, I always recommend starting with that direct instruction. And I know that's not fun or maybe exciting, but we've got to give that clear, explicit teaching first to lay that foundation. Discovery learning is not recommended. Figure it out on their own. I don't recommend that either because children rely on the knowledge that adults have to teach them accurate information. And so, after you've given that direct instruction, then we can give opportunities to explore and practice in playful and engaging ways. You can use a puppet when you're introducing the letter names, the letter sounds. You can create motions and have them acted out, which the alphabet slides that I mentioned do have an action for every single letter that you can teach the children to do to help them remember the letter sound. You can play games, you can sing songs, you can use hands-on resources like clay and Play-Doh to build the letters out of them. Puzzles are great too. I love puzzles. My kids always did puzzles of the alphabet when they were younger, or name puzzles, especially to learn the letters of their name. So there are lots of fun ways that you can do it, but I always like to say, make sure you give that direct instruction first because that part has to happen.
That is such good advice. So, everybody remember, we're doing that direct instruction first. And I
Yeah,
think I heard
absolutely.
you share a quote from Anita Archer. Is that
Probably. I
right?
love her.
I think it was something about cutting the fluff.
Yeah, cut the fluff and teach the stuff.
Yes, cut the fluff and teach the stuff. I do love that because we can get swept up in the social media world, this Pinterest world of trying to make everything look cutesy and be super
Yes,
fun. And of course, we want it to be engaging, but we have to remember that there's a purpose and we really want them to understand the alphabetic principle, have that deep understanding of why we're even doing this. Why are we
yes.
even learning the alphabet in the first place?
Absolutely. I think we can sometimes lose our way when it comes to making something more engaging or more interactive, but children really like to just be told what they need to know and just give them that knowledge and then they can play with it, then they can apply it. But we've got to give that baseline first.
Yes, totally agree. And I'm sure you get this question a lot, and I know the answer, and I'm sure my listeners do, but would you recommend a letter of the week?
No, definitely
No.
not. No letter of the week. I'd recommend a letter of the day if you can
Yeah.
do that. And it's also essential to cycle through the alphabet multiple times. If you do letter of the week, you have spent 26 weeks of the school year on the letters and you've only taught them each once. So based on that research again from Piasta, it's best to cycle through multiple times. And you can use a different approach each time you cycle through. You might go A to Z order for one of your cycles. Then you might go through and teach letters grouped by similar letter formation. If you want to focus on handwriting, you might focus on student names and the letters that are in their names, because we know that children learn those first. So maybe the first month of school, you pull students in small groups and teach them the letters in their name. And they also need to learn how to write their name at the beginning of the school year too. So it's really important that you give that explicit instruction and you also revisit the alphabet in a systematic way to build those early literacy skills.
Yes, thank you. That's actually
You're
my top
welcome.
watched video on YouTube is no more letter of the week because
Oh, I gotta watch it.
just so many better ways to introduce the alphabet. And when my oldest was in preschool, we had a mom's group and we would totally do letter of the week. We thought it was super cute. We could do a little craft and an activity. We were all former teachers, and none of us knew that, it was a fun play date that we had, but it wasn't actually effective in any way
Right,
of getting
right.
our little ones to learn their alphabet. Now we know so much more.
Yeah,
Now, when it comes to teaching the alphabet, I also love that was you're teaching all of the components of the letter, you can have little ones start blending and segmenting right away. You don't have to teach the entire alphabet before you start that reading and spelling. So could you talk to us a little bit about blending and segmenting?
absolutely. I actually just did a session on decoding, encoding, and talked about blending and segmenting for unlocking SOR. And I have even some things back here for decoding and encoding. So that's perfect. But yeah, absolutely. Even before children even know any letters or don't know what they're looking at yet, you can do it orally. You can work
Yes.
on phonemic awareness and start blending and segmenting sounds. You can pretend to talk like a robot and break the sounds apart when you're working with toddlers. When my son was little, we used to go on walks around the neighborhood, and I taught him how to segment syllables before he even really knew what a syllable was. I would just say, wow, look at that mailbox. Can you say that? Mailbox. And then all of a sudden he was breaking words into syllables before he was even aware that that was what he was doing. And focusing on identifying that initial sound in words is so important. That's one of those top predictors of future reading success. So when you are doing anything with your child, do you want some milk? What do you hear at the beginning of milk? And really kind of stretch it out. Those continuous sounds are helpful when you're doing that. And you want them to pull off the oh, I hear at the beginning of milk. So you can even begin doing that before you've even taught any letters at all.
That is my goal. I say my mission is to have every parent know what phonemic awareness is because
Yes.
it seems like a big phrase. And even when I was teaching, that is not something that we talked about. We didn't do phonemic awareness practice in the classroom. I was unfamiliar. I couldn't really differentiate between phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. I got so confused. And so I know parents are like, what are you talking about? I'm just going to have my child memorize sight words. And so I always say my mission is if every parent understood what phonemic awareness was, and you can do these all day long in the car when your little one's eating, and that's going to set them up for so much more success than ever trying to have them memorize sight words
Yeah.
just by working on that phonemic awareness piece. So I love that you brought that up.
If you've ever sang the song Apples and Bananas and
Yes.
you're changing that initial sound, that's exactly what you're doing. So there's so many things that you may be doing already that you don't even realize are working on phonemic awareness. So it's just fun to incorporate those little wordplay activities even before your child enters preschool, and it makes all the difference.
So true. And let's think about our preschoolers because a lot of preschoolers are learning their letters. They don't have to know all of their letters and sounds before they go to kindergarten. That's not an expectation that we have. Research does show we do want them to know some of their letters and sounds, but they don't need to know all of them.
Yeah.
But I really like knowing that when we're teaching the alphabet in preschool, if a child is really struggling to retain it and you've had the explicit instruction in the review, that can sometimes be a good indicator that something might be going on. And so, can you give parents some advice if their child is struggling learning the alphabet What's considered developmentally normal and appropriate, and when might they be more concerned about that?
Yeah, so like you said, first you need to ensure that that explicit systematic instruction is happening, because if it isn't, that could be the reason behind your child not knowing any letters. It can't just be taught through exposure. It really needs to be that direct instruction. And again, it could take up to 200 repetitions if a child has dyslexia or other learning challenges. The next step is to track with assessment data. And so hopefully the teacher is keeping track of progress through assessment and seeing if a student is making progress in that, or how quickly they are in comparison to their peers. You definitely want to be in communication with your child's teacher to know, is this normal? Is this what's happening and what you're seeing with all of the students, or is my child struggling more than other students are? And then we also want to make sure these students are getting intervention, because they may need that extra time to get in more repetitions, work in a smaller group. So that should be the next step if we're identifying a student that is struggling, getting them the interventions that they need, and understanding that root cause of what's going on. Is this phoneme awareness that is the struggle? Is this working memory that's a struggle? Is this their processing speed that is a struggle? And from there, we might need to do some diagnostics or additional testing. So, as the parent, if you have concerns, you feel like there's red flags, request testing, and request it in writing. Because once you request it in writing, the school then has a certain number of days to get that testing performed. So it is within your rights to request testing. And usually, as a parent, you have that gut feeling. You notice that my child is not, or even in comparison to your own children, you may notice that one of your children learned the letters very quickly and the other child is not. Also, if within your family, if there is dyslexia within your family tree, that can be passed on. It can be something that runs in families. So if you, when you were a child, if you struggled with reading and you struggled with learning new things, that could pass on to your child. So you may recognize that your child is struggling the same way you did. So definitely request testing from your school, because they can provide a diagnostic and to see what the root cause of this struggle is.
Early intervention is so, so important.
Yes, don't wait. Don't
Don't
wait.
wait. And it really is a balancing act for us parents. I understand if your child is struggling, you want to approach it with some curiosity. Why are they struggling? Am I not doing a great job of introducing the letters and sounds? Maybe I haven't hit all the components. You don't want to jump to conclusions, right? That, oh
Right.
my gosh, this is the end of the world. It's a balancing act of some
Yeah.
kids are going to need more exposures and repetition, and some kids really are just going to need that intense intervention. So
Yeah.
it's hard, but I do feel like most parents have that gut feeling, like you said. They have that intuition that something might not be going right. So if your child is in school, definitely have that open communication with the teacher. And if you're the one working with them at home, you can always reach out to any of us on Instagram too, or on social
Yeah.
media, and we'd be happy to give you advice and kind of point you in the right direction.
Absolutely. And also speech and language. You can get an evaluation for speech if you think it may have something to do with their articulation. So definitely look into that. And if your child isn't in school yet, you can talk with your pediatrician about getting a referral for speech and language if you think that's something that's going on. And that can definitely impact learning the letter names, or being able to produce the sounds, or being able to blend and segment.
Absolutely. There's just so much that goes into learning how to read, and we want to set the
Yes.
foundation up correctly at the beginning, because then when they get to first and second grade, it's going to be so much easier for them.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I agree.
Well, Jessica, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for your time. I would love to know what you hope the listeners take away from this episode.
I hope that they've taken away that explicit instruction, teaching the alphabet directly, um, must be done. I think I repeated it several times, so I just wanted to repeat it again. Alphabet books and posters are great tools, but they don't replace direct instruction. You need to make sure you are teaching in a structured, systematic way to help children grasp those names, those sounds, those shapes of letters, because it is a lot of knowledge to learn. So they need multiple repetitions. So let's make sure that we're not just providing alphabet materials, but that we are taking the time to teach and reinforce them one letter at a time and laying that groundwork for future reading success.
Absolutely. And we totally forgot to mention be super careful with those alphabet books and materials because you
Yes.
want to not introduce your child to every sound that the letter can make when they're in preschool and kindergarten. We're very particular about what sounds we're using when we're introducing that alphabet.
So true. And I have videos on YouTube saying the most common sounds and on my Instagram and on my Facebook. So if you're not sure what the most common sounds are, message me, email me, and I'll send you a video that has the proper pronunciations.
Yes, that's perfect. And of course, just one that we can share now. Please don't do xylophone for letter X.
No, no xylophone.
No xylophone. Oh, Jessica, thank you so much again for your time. Last question, and then I'll let you go. This is the
Okay.
Littles Love Learning podcast. So, what do you love most about working with littles?
Oh my goodness, there are so many things that I love about working with the youngest learners at school, but it is just seeing their tremendous growth from the beginning of the year to the end of the school year, coming in not knowing any letters of the alphabet and leaving reading and writing full sentences, just to see their confidence grow and blossom, those light bulb moments where all of a sudden it just clicks and they just take off and begin reading paragraphs in front of you. And you're just like, oh my goodness, yesterday you weren't reading anything and now you're reading full passages. That is the most exciting part. And young learners are always excited and really engaged, and they just want to be a part of the learning. So that's why I love working with the little ones so much. It's truly my favorite part of teaching. So I am a primary teacher at heart, all the time, every day, all the way.
I could not agree more with you. Totally, totally agree. Well, thank you again, Jessica. When I release this episode, I will put all of the links down below. I'm going to find the link for that alphabet slideshow. And then
I'll
I
send
believe
them
you
to
have
you.
thank you, all your social media. I will definitely link to Emily Hanford's work because it's phenomenal. But
Yes.
you also have a freebie. I totally forgot that you had a freebie for
Yeah.
listeners.
Yeah, I do have a freebie for the listeners. So I also have tons of freebies on my TPT in my TPT store. So definitely check out the freebies. I share them all the time. But specifically, I have an assessment where you can assess letter names, letter sounds, and then some of the more common phonics patterns like the long vowels and some digraphs. And it's just a free assessment with the flashcards to go with the assessment. The directions are there. You can print it out and you can use that to keep track of progress. Parents can use it, tutors can use it, teachers can use it.
That is wonderful. I will definitely link to that as well. Well, thank
Yeah,
you, Jessica. We appreciate your time.
you're welcome.